Hello, friends. My name is host Eric, and I present to you today the Manifesto of Typology. This is a manifesto about which I believe everybody in the typology community should agree. The metaframe is as follows: contemporary psychology suffers from an identity crisis. There presides over the vaguely defined field no single philosophical imperative. To be precise, psychology operates under a set of different and often conflicting frames. We can broadly divide it into theory, research, and practice, but often work done in any capacity is done in a vacuum. For empiricists, that is, say researchers, only replicatable data matters. For healthcare providers, outcomes are necessarily subjective. Psychiatrists often rely on effective drug combinations to treat mental illnesses, even when they have little understanding of how the drugs work. Doesn't matter as long as the patient's better, right? Both researchers and physicians presumably operate under some theoretical framework, but reality contradicts this. That's the status quo we have right now. Applied psychology is mostly about promoting good mental health. However, what comprises good mental health often turns into a normative question. Is there a single mean of average well-functioning human from which deviance of enough significance can be interpreted as a disorder, syndrome, or other such label? Currently, the DSM identifies a number of disorders that, in their descriptions, would seem to be labeling deviance from specific norms while ignoring conflicting norms that might legitimize the observed deviance. So, for example, is ADHD really a disorder? How much attention is normal to expect someone to pay towards something they have no authentic interest in paying attention to? The capacity to force yourself to pay attention to that which doesn't make sense to you, is not relevant to you, is boring to you, or contrary to your nature seems oddly impositional, right? Or ontologically colonial. So that's another part of the status quo. What's needed then is a frame of reference that explains deviations in a non normative way. There's both an accurate accounting of how and why human personalities manifest, and when and where deviance from observed norms represents a state of mental distress, illness, etc., and when and where said deviance is simply an expression of one of a set of personalities, each of which must be judged against its own norms. If you judge me against the norms of an ISFP, there's something very wrong with me, because I don't share any of their conscious functions. So, frame. Union cognitive functions, best known in popular culture as MBTI, offers a single frame of reference through which all objects of psychological analysis can be filtered without imposing ontological violence onto those it labels. The contemporary alternate frame, the status quo personality explanation, is the Big Five, and notably, it fails to meet the criteria iterated above, namely being non normative. Conscientiousness, which the Big Five presents as a universal trait of human personality, makes a clear normative statement. Low conscientiousness is bad, and high is good. Concurrently, it suggests a person be measured against the quality of openness. This too conveys a normative claim, and yet there's no mechanics to explain how these normative goods might, in fact, prove inversely proportional. If a person is constantly open to new ideas, then it is necessarily the case that they aren't very good at following through on old ones. Thus does Ocean, or Big Five, impose ontological violence onto all humans by falsely presenting attributes people don't have, innately, as standards of human values to uphold. So, down here on the impact level of this argumentation, of this manifesto about typology and typological systems and stuff like that, and again, this is something that everybody in typology should agree with, whether I'm disagreeing with their interpretation of it or not. Because this pits the non normative quality of typology against the normative quality of the Big Five specifically. Impact level. The typology consensus I propose will begin what I hope shall become a groundswell of paradigm shifting understanding regarding what it means to be a human being. Solid, rational analysis reveals that a single clear map of personality exists, and that said map subsumes all other frames, and that allowing this natural metaframe to inform all psychological practices and analyses thereby subsumed provides solvency for many, if not most, of the problems plaguing society today. Which is a big claim, but I believe to be absolutely true. Because a single prime directive drives every human being, we can understand each of the 16 personality types as strategic configurations. Well, that's We can understand the 16 possible personality types as strategic configurations towards attaining this prime directive. Get rid of each of. For all people, the prime directive is to minimize the distance between their maps or expectations and their realities. When a map proves unreliable in dramatic ways, we incur such harms as PTSD. I didn't expect my loved ones to be shot to death on the way to school today is a stark chasm between expectations and reality, right? The people pay attention. Now, obviously, there can be good surprises as well, but even those, if you are conditioned, if you have BPD, for example, and it means that you simply will not allow yourself to have a healthy relationship. So, map expecting are you of the other person to betray you. You will push them until they do, so that your map is correct. So we can see how this prime directive plays out in a lot of different ways. But let me not get sidetracked from my manifesto. That people pay attention in different ways observationally sustains. It's a different mental process, for example, when I figure out 6,784 divided by 6 than when I tell what that big pointy landmark in Paris is called. In the first instance, I need to deliberate to determine the answer. In the second instance, the information just comes to mind. This deliberation and knowledge comprise that deliberation. These deliberation and knowledge functions comprise different ways of being and can be categorized as different, distinct attentional manners. When I'm thinking hard about the math question in my head, those seconds are spent differently than when I'm knowing the answer to something. In the latter case, I'm likely not only knowing the name, but also picturing the thing in my head. The first is willful and requires sustained effort. The second is automatic and instantaneous. That they are different in quality and nature, therefore, is indisputable. We can also note that for any given prospective decision, that decision can be adjudicated against an interested calculus or a disinterested calculus. For example, if I choose what's best for me, I might get all of the pie and no one else gets any. If I choose what's fair, everyone might get one slice of pie. We want to use a disinterested calculus when we are doing things like refereeing a sports game, working as a judge, or enforcing the law. However, we don't want to use a disinterested calculus when dating. It's better to pick the person you like best than to pick the person who checks off the most legitimacy boxes. So it turns out that these varying ways of paying attention stack in only 16 possible ways. We call each of these a personality type and label them ISTP, ENTP, etc. For some types, experiential data is highly prioritized and deeply understood. Necessarily, as a trade-off, abstract analysis, like what you're hearing me read right now, is more or less beyond their capacity. Their analytical limitations do not represent something wrong with them. Instead, they represent a non-normative reality, that every attentional strength has an attentional trade-off. If I'm very good at picking ideas apart to see how they might be wrong, then I'm not very good at pulling the trigger when I encounter an idea that's right. I'm instead predisposed to dissecting the idea for myself first. These sort of attentional trade-offs explain most of the differences between people and are almost always the source of disagreement. This manifesto, then, presents a grand and noble mission statement. Our goal as typologists and the typology community is to normalize the varying configural differences that comprise human personalities such that no one is hereafter subjected to the ontological assault of being told there's something wrong with you, when in reality the aspect of self being critiqued is a normal and healthy expression of their type. Now, I want to thank student Grace, who actually is the cause of this thing. She wants to start a typology club at her school and wanted me to help her with some sort of explanation to the school as to why this is a good idea, And I kind of got carried away and wrote this. I said, don't worry about it. I'm not going to charge you for the session or anything. I plan to, if it's cool with you, I'm going to use this as a manifesto. And it seems to work well as one. So hopefully you enjoyed it. And thank you to Grace. And if you're in the typology community, there's nothing here that you should disagree with, no matter what you think. These are the basics, the basic realities that even DSP and I should agree on. Okay, if you're in any kind of idea that doesn't conform with what's said here, which makes very few claims, then you're not talking about typology. You're talking about some make-believe kung fu.